Today I want to share with you about remembering, about remembrance, about looking back. You know, we're here at the end of 2014. I mean, we just have just a few days left until the year's over. And so if you've made a New Year's resolution for 2014, you've got about 3 days to knock that puppy out. And then you haven't accomplished. So I don't know. I hope it wasn't to lose 50 pounds or so. We're going to have to cut your arm off. But you have just a few days. And so now at the end of 2014 is a time that we begin to look back on this year. What happened this year? How did this year go? What were the high points? What were the low points? What were the things God did in my life? What were some things I wanted God to do in my life that didn't happen? We begin to look at all of this. We begin to take stock of what God has done. In 1 Samuel chapter 7 is what we're going to look at this morning. 1 Samuel 7:12. Let me read this to you. Israel, seems like as always, was up against battles, were up against the Philistines, and they were without a king. They didn't have a king. Samuel was leading the nation. God once again brought victory into the nation, brought victory into the battles that they were facing against the Philistines. He once again pulled them out of the fire. And so to commemorate that, Samuel built a statue. Well, really just a rock. Have you ever had a pet rock? Samuel had almost a pet rock because he named it. He named this rock that he placed there. 1 Samuel 7:12 says, Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen. He named it Ebenezer, saying, Thus far the Lord has helped us. He named the rock Ebenezer, meaning thus far the Lord has helped us. What's the implication here? What was Samuel telling the Israelites? What was Samuel telling those? Every time they saw the rock, they remembered, didn't they? Every time they saw where the rock had been placed, they remembered. And the implication was, the Lord has helped us thus far, so He will help us again. Or He will help us now. Thus the Lord has helped us, so we know that He can, and so we know that He will continue to help us. So he stuck this rock, a monument he placed to remind the people that God had been faithful, that the Lord had helped them when they faced difficulty. We don't build monuments like that each year to remember. I guess you could. Yes, you could go when you get home, get a rock and name it Fred or something and stick it there as a reminder of what God has done in your life. It's almost like a souvenir. But we don't have to do that. What we do is we remember, the Holy Spirit reminds us about what God has done in our life. And we can say, just as Samuel did when he placed this stone, when he placed this monument there, we can say just as he did, thus far the Lord has helped us. Thus far the Lord has looked after us. Thus far the Lord has provided. Maybe we look back over this past year and we say, well, thus far the Lord brought health into my life. Thus far, the Lord blessed me financially, or thus far I finally finished college, or thus far I feel like I've grown spiritually, or thus far my marriage is stronger, or thus far it was a terrible year, but I gained a lot of wisdom and knowledge and trust in God. Whatever it is, we look back on it and we say, thus far the Lord has helped us through all of this. Whether it was good or bad, whether it was victories or difficulties where we simply just grew. We've all been through a lot this year, haven't we? The church, just the church, if we look at the church has been through something, probably one of the most traumatic things that any church goes through. This is it. This is the trauma of a church, is that they would lose their pastor. Especially when they had no idea that it was coming. You just show up ready to worship God and what? It's traumatic. Probably second to that is leaving a church. It's traumatic. See, while God was working over here in June, where he was guiding and he was leading the shepherd that was here, he was guiding and leading me over here. I didn't know what was going on here. You didn't know what was going on there, but yet God knew. God was guiding. God was leading. But it was difficult. It was hard. It's been difficult in losing a pastor and trying to come to terms with that. And then it's difficult in gaining a pastor and trying to figure out, what's he doing? Who is he? I don't even know if I like him. But all of this are difficulties that we go through. Whether it's personal or whether it's as a church body, we look back over this year and we ask and we say, thus far the Lord has helped us. And we set a monument up. And we look back over a year like this and we see God has helped us. We look back over this year and we see that the sovereign Lord was working when it didn't seem like he was working. We look back and we can say, thus far the Lord, he helped us. So today I want to share with you my 3 Ebenezers. Can I do that? My 3 Ebenezers. Now you can have your own Ebenezers. The things in your life that have happened over this past year, the good, the bad, the monuments that you hold up in your life and you say, thus far the Lord has helped me, so he will continue to help me in my life. But these are the 3 Ebenezers, the 3 things, the 3 principles, 3 monuments, the 3 things that I learned this year, and I want to share them with you. 3 things, 3 principles. The 3 things really have nothing to do with each other, except they're things that God has taught me. He taught me a lot, but I wanted to share these 3 things with you this morning. Some of them have been expressed through messages that I've preached in the past, over this past year, but they were all birthed out of what the Holy Spirit, or what God was teaching me. So let me share those with you this morning. The first one was this: He'll protect and bless in the valley. And we get it out of Psalms 23, and probably the very first verses that I ever learned as a kid in Royal Rangers was the 23rd Psalm. Verses 4 and 5 say this: even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. The shepherd guides us even when we go through a dark valley in our life. The shepherd is there even though we walk through a valley in which we don't know where we're headed. Even if we walk through a place in a valley, you ever been in a valley where it is so narrow and so deep the sun can't even get in there because of the way it is? So you may be walking through darkness. You may be with almost as if everything is pitch black and you really can't see anything and you're just feeling your way. And all you know is that this is the path that God has you on, and you know that the shepherd is right there with you. But other than that, you're lost. You're in a dark place. You're in a dark valley. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, the psalmist says, I will fear no evil. Why? Because you are with me. And the reason that is, and the reason that he protects and he blesses in the valley is simply this, and that is, your greatest times of spiritual growth will happen in the valley. The greatest times of spiritual growth in your life will happen when you're walking in the midst of the valley. Because they're difficult, because it's hard, because it's dark, because you have to hold on to the shepherd when he leads you. See, there's no spiritual growth when you're on the mountaintop all the time. No, I love the mountaintop. You know what I'm talking about? The time when God is talking to you, the time when the Holy Spirit is inspiring his word, when you pray, it's as if Jesus himself is in the room with you, and you get those little goosebumps on the back of your neck, you know, and you just feel the presence of God. I love those times, but those are not the times where God grows you spiritually. They're wonderful, but it's in the valley where God grows you, where God stretches you, where God leads you, and you learn to trust. When you can't see the direction, you can't see where you're going, all you can do is trust and know that he will protect you and he will bless you as you walk through that valley. I mean, you see it in Matthew chapter 17 when Jesus took Peter, James, and John up to the top of a mountain. It says he was transfigured before them. He changed. And up there with him was Moses and Elijah talking to him. Now, how many know that was a mountaintop experience beyond anything? There's Jesus talking to Moses and Elijah. Does it get any better than that? Well, the disciples didn't think so, because the disciples said, this is so great, we don't want to leave. Let's build 3 altars here and let's just stay. Does it get better than this? The mountaintop experience was great, but Jesus said, we can't stay here. We got to get back down to the valley. We got to come off of this mountain and get back down into the nitty-gritty, into the dirt. And when they came down off the mountain, one of the first things they came across was a demon-possessed man. Had they stayed on top of the mountaintop, had they stayed where just the glory of God was, had they stayed where it felt good, where it felt great to be in the presence of God, the man who was bound, the man whose only help was Jesus, would have never come in contact with him had they stayed on the mountaintop. Because the growth and the work is down in the valley. Jesus didn't work up on the mountain. His work was down in the valley, where the shepherd guides and where the shepherd leads us. But we learn in the 23rd Psalm, yet though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, because he's with me. And we learn that he protects us and he blesses us even when we're walking in that valley. The second thing I learned is this: his hand is always guiding. His hand is always guiding. I think I preached a message and I used this maybe the weekend that I was here trying out. Getting voted on, getting put through the ringer. When I was in the Spanish Inquisition, his hand was guiding. And I got it out of Daniel 5:5, and it says, suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster wall where the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. There was Daniel. He was there. The king saw a hand writing on the wall. I mean, can you imagine that? A hand appears and begins to write on the wall, and they recognize the hand. See, I can recognize God's hand a lot of times. I can recognize him because I've seen him before. I've seen his work. I've seen how he does stuff. And so as they watched this hand right on the wall, it may have been familiar to them, and it should have been familiar. The letters that were being written on the wall, they were familiar, but they just didn't make any sense in the order and the way that they were written. How many know that's true? I found that that's true in my life. I saw God's handwriting. I recognized God's handwriting. I knew His hand was moving. I just didn't know what He was doing. I had no idea what was going on. I don't know. God, I see it. I recognize it. I see your handwriting. I just don't know what you're doing. But His hand is there, always guiding. We see it in the 139th Psalm when He says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up in heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths or hell, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there, your hand will guide me. I don't always understand what God's writing. I don't always understand what God is doing. But I know He's there. And I've learned to trust Him. Even when I don't know what He's writing, I've learned to trust. I've learned to look at it and say, God, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're writing about me. I don't know where you're guiding me. But I know it's you, and I trust you. How many of you ever had to do that in your own life? Or you look and you go, God, I don't know what you're doing. I know you're here. I recognize you. But God, what are you doing? Why are you leading me through here? Why are you guiding me through this sickness? Why is your hand writing on the wall? I don't understand. But I trust you, Lord. So we trusted. So I learned that even though I don't understand, His hand is always guiding. Can I tell you this? I did know this. I can't remember. I said this in the first service, and I can't remember whether I've ever told you guys this. So keep it to yourself. I knew we were coming here. I knew. God had told us in one of those unambiguous, clear ways that God never talks to us. He said, this is where you are going, period. That was it. And I said, in all of my faith, you've got to be kidding, God. There is no way. How is it going to happen? So the weekend we came, the weekend of the Spanish Inquisition, nothing fazed me. Nothing bothered me. Because I knew this is where God was sending us. I didn't always understand. I didn't understand the writing. I didn't understand the guiding. But I knew it was Him, and I knew He was guiding and leading us. The last thing this morning, probably the greatest thing that I learned over this past year, probably the greatest principle that God taught me, the greatest Ebenezer, the greatest monument that I can look at, and I can say, thus far, the Lord has helped me. It's found in Ruth chapter 2, verse 16. It says, he even pulled out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. See, Ruth had nothing. Ruth had lost it all. Ruth was with her mother-in-law who had lost it all. Ruth's only friend, her sister-in-law, had left him. They had nothing. They had no prospects for anything. All they had to do was to go to a field and pick up grain out of the dirt and try to sift the grain and out of the dirt to have enough to survive. But Boaz noticed Ruth, and he told Ruth, you can continue to glean, or you can continue to go down these paths, these rows, and pick up the grain out of the dirt that's left. You can continue to do that. Then out of earshot where she doesn't hear, he turns to his servants and he said, let her do it, and every once in a while pull out a stalk and leave it behind for her to pick up. And so they did. They would walk and they would, as they began to gather the stalks, they would pull out a stalk out of the bundle and they would drop it on the path behind them as they went. So as Ruth would walk down this path, as she was scrounging in the dirt to get enough for sustenance, she kept running into stalks that had been left there from the master. Stalks that had not fallen. Stalks that were not there by happen chance. Stalks that were not there by accident. But stalks that had been left there by the master for her to pick up. See, I learned that God leaves stalks in the paths in which we're walking. Amazing thing about the story of Ruth in that part was that when it was all over in the end of the day, the sun began to go down, the work had stopped, they could work no more, couldn't see, and she had finished. She looked and took what she had gathered and threshed it and separated the grain from everything else. And it said she had 30 pounds of grain. That wasn't just enough to eat. It was above and beyond. It was above and beyond what she had even asked God for. It was above and beyond what she thought she could even scrape out of the dirt, because he had left stalks for her that she could pick up. And it was so much, so great, that the blessing was above and beyond her need. And she took it to her mother-in-law. They had more than they needed. They had more than they wanted. They sold it so that they could survive, because the master had left stalks. I learned that when we walk in God's path and we think that we're scrounging in the dirt and we think that we are just scraping by, struggling to make it, walking in that dark, dark valley, walking where you don't know what God is doing, and you think that the greatest thing you can do is just survive. I found out the master leaves stalks for us to pick up. Blessings that you didn't know where they came from. Blessings that you hadn't anticipated. Blessings that the master had said, because you're walking and you are walking on this path and you are doing what I've asked you to do and you are working, doing everything you can to survive. I am leaving this for you. It's the way God works. Oh, I knew that. All these principles, these things that I learned this year, it's not as if it's the first time that I'd ever heard them. None of them are earth-shattering. I can't write a book about them. God once again taught them to me in a way that they are stuck in here. And God does that for all of us. We just have to look back over the year to see what God has done. We just have to look back over the year and see the Ebenezers in our life. The monuments that have been placed there that say, thus far the Lord has helped me. And I know that He'll continue to help me beyond today. Because when I walk through the valley, He is there. When I don't understand what He is writing, He is guiding. And I know that sometimes you just walk the path that's placed before you, and you just pick up the stalks that He has left behind. So those are what I learned. He is faithful again and again and again, and He will be faithful in your life. Some of you have had a tough year. Some of you have had difficulties this year. Faced things you've never faced before. Ran into problems that you never thought you would run into. But out of those are Ebenezers that you can say, thus far the Lord has not left me. Thus far the Lord has helped me. And I know He'll continue to do it over and over again. Let's all stand. You know, because of Ruth's faithfulness, because Ruth didn't give up, because Ruth walked the path that was before her, and simply picked up what the master had left behind. The book of Ruth, which is, there's so much more to the whole book, but it wraps up with this verse. See, Boaz, who she married, was the father of Obed, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David, the king of Israel. Ruth, a Moabite, in the lineage of Jesus Christ, because she simply walked the path that was set before her, knowing the shepherd was beside her and would not leave her, and picked up what he was leaving. Jesus was the result. So you'll not always see what God brings about in your life. You'll not always see these Ebenezers, what God has brought you through, the ultimate result of what God has done. Ruth never saw it. The culmination of all of it was salvation through the Son of God, Emmanuel, God here on earth. So we trust.